Hey guys, before we get into today's episode, I just wanted to give a quick shout out to our level 3 courses. Wem and I tried to sit down and do some big swanky radio advert and it's just not us. So I'm just going to chat about it for a minute. So our level 3 training is the same price as some other courses out there where you just get 5 days and you are out the door, do your coursework on your own. Our course is for the same price is 10 days of training. So for our May cohort, that's 5 days. And then we have a bit of a month off to just let that settle. We come back for a weekend, maybe do a bit of camping. Then we have a bit more time off and then we come back for another weekend. With the September group, we do 5 Mondays starting in September. Then we have a bit of a break. Then we come back in the new year and do another 5. So we're really like focusing on building community as we go. We didn't really want to do that like conveyor belt thing. We could be doing, a level 3 course every school holiday, banging them out, off you go. But we don't want to do that. We do Zoom calls throughout the year. We do loads of like cohort, community building sessions and stuff to help people with what they're doing. And that means that we want to do it well rather than doing lots of it. So we're trying to help people do that. And we're also really big on this community aspect. And we found that people not only find the course easier to do in terms of workload, but also easier to do emotionally when they do it with somebody they already know. So to try and encourage that, we're doing a train together kind of offer. So if you and someone else sign up to do the course with us together, we'll give you some money off your course because we found that the success rate is much higher. People are much happier while they're doing the course, and it makes our life easier as tutors because, happy students, motivated students, we're all kind of getting on together. So if you want to be part of a community rather than just being put through a conveyor belt, then have a look at our website. It goes to myforestschooltraining.co.uk. That'll take you to the Children of Forest website, and you can go from there, get your application in, and join our communities. So on with the podcast.
I'm Wem.
And I'm Lewis.
This is the Forest School Podcast.
Let's go!
Lovely job.
Lovely.
Oh, it's very relaxing recording like this. We're in Wem's house. We've got a microphone each. We're
and sitting on sofas.
sitting on sofas.
I'd be really interested to know what the sound quality is like of this compared to other ones.
What if this is the first, because we're going to record a couple today.
Yeah.
What if people are like, you guys are really you didn't get excited about education. You didn't shout and...
It was a bit lame.
It was a bit
boring.
We're too chilled out now.
Just too chilled out.
We need the buzz of the...
Lewis has literally got his feet on a coffee table.
Sorry, should I take them off?
Not at all.
Is that right?
It's completely fine.
Okay.
But it's just, a different vibe, isn't it? To perching on the edge of a log seat in the outside, or being on Zoom.
Yeah.
Because we've done quite a few on Zoom. What I do like about being on Zoom is that I can just be on my spinny chair and be spinning around.
Yeah.
So yeah. So we're talking about, you did a podcast with
Richard Whall.
Richard Whall.
Richard is amazing. I met Richard at the conference and did a workshop with him, and I was like, he apologised for it in the recording that we're going to play in a bit, but basically he went off on so many tangents at the conference. I was like, you are my kind of guy.
Yeah.
He kept going oh, this isn't relevant, but I'm going to tell you anyway.
Yeah.
To the point where he sent us an email afterwards and said, I didn't really explain who I am and what I did. He was so excited about the subject matter.
And this was the listeners who've listened to the podcast about that we did at the FSA conference.
Yes.
And I was saying that I saw you in the distance just twirling a rope around and around in magical patterns. So that was the workshop that you did with Richard.
Yes.
The Way of the Rope. So this podcast, so I couldn't be at the podcast recording, but I've listened to it today, so I have experienced it, and I have some comments and questions. But yeah, tell me.
So I'll read Richard's thing. So he sent across, as a lot of us do, afterwards go, oh, I didn't mention. It's a bit like doing that interview thing where you go, I didn't mention the thing.
Yeah.
For a job. But anyway, so he says Richard Whall, and then it's got all the letters after his name because he's done all this academia. Is a lecturer in human movement, teaching on the sport, PE and outdoors undergraduate courses at the University of Central Lancashire. Having previously worked across the health, fitness and education industry as a coach, trainer, advisor and qualified primary school teacher, he has combined his work and academic experiences, developing an interest in the physicality of learning from a scientific and philosophical perspective. This has led his current explorations of the concept of physical intelligence as a PhD project and people's experiences of physical intelligence through running. So that's Richard's.
And that I think that gives a really good flavour of what the mood of this podcast is about, because like you say, it goes deep quite quick, and it's really super juicy, but it's all they're like, what was the phrase? Something like the
physicality of learning
and the intelligence of physical intelligence. All of this stuff is like, so juicy. When you read his job description, I was like, I want to do that. I want that job. I'm just going to add that to my list of like other life.
Yes.
Yeah.
Amazing. And Richard sent us loads of like links that we can put in the show notes. So if you're listening to this and you know, if you're like, this is my jam, and the cat is clearly interested.
The cat is very interested. Hey, Luna. You always like to get involved, don't you? Yeah, and the conversation kind of meanders from things that are the philosophy of physicality, but then some stuff that is more so in terms of relating it to forest school, there's some stuff about barefooting, there's some stuff about kind of the movement of the spine and that kind of thing, which I think if
regulating movement.
Yeah, and if you're even a tiny bit interested in movement outdoors, then I think there's some juicy springboards in here for you.
Amazing. Right. Yeah. We'll chat again at the end.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
No, that's fine. It all sounds good. Right. Okay. So for the people that are just watching in, it's me and Wem is hopefully joining us in a bit. But we're here with Richard Whall. So for background, Richard, you and I met at the conference this year, and you were running. Well, you were going to be running a different one.
I ended up doing a bit of a rope flow way of the rope workshop. The MovNat workshop that was intended, unfortunately, just had to be postponed due to the colleague from MovNat I was going to do it with was injured at the time. So I'm not fully MovNat qualified, so it wasn't right for me to continue on and deliver it, maintaining brand image and what have you. So we just switched around and we had a good time flowing with the ropes. I think you said you were drag and rolling it in the woods.
I was, went straight back into the woods.
I don't know if you carried on.
Do you know what? A little bit. I think it's become a bit of it's gone into that is a very odd phrase to, I was going to say it's gone in the fiddle bank, but that sounds worse than I mean it to. It's another thing to be doing with lengths of rope. So, and you, as well as sort of teaching those like practical skills, part of the workshop was a bit about understanding movement and the big word, but I'm going to butcher it. But biotensegrity.
Biotensegrity, yeah.
Yes, smashed it. So, for people that don't know that, would you be able to explain a bit about like what that is and maybe how that relates to like your background?
And sort of similar to the way it went with the workshop, I'll probably start there and end up in 1,000,001 other different places. So just keep drawing me back in.
Absolutely part of the course, don't worry.
Another way of using the rope, get a lasso on it and pull me back in, and we'll come back in. So biotensegrity, essentially, it's there are two ways, to the best of my knowledge and those that I work with, there are two ways humans have worked out how to build and construct things, make solid freestanding structures. One is through the direct compressional gravitational load. So you stack one thing on top of another, and provided the center of mass falls down the middle, hey presto, we should be okay. The other is a biotensegrity. Well, it's not a bio, it's a tensegral structure. The bio bit means in relation to the human body or any living body. But the tensegrity way of building is a blend, a balance of tension and compression, through which neither can exist on their own, but through the fine balance, you can create some really fascinating structures. So things like suspension bridges have a little bit of a tensegral nature to them, and there are various different things. If you Google tensegrity, you can find some amazing structures.
I realised it made sense to me. I don't know if anybody else has come across them. Those tables that seem to be all the rage now. They're like
Yes, yeah, they're a
on a couple
tensegrity
of
table.
chains. Yeah.
Yeah,
So I was watching some of the videos you sent, and as soon as they showed some of these models, I went, "Oh, it's those tables that are like they look like they're floating," and I still don't understand how
they,
they are. And then they knock
they
them, and they just bunk.
yeah, they do look like they're floating. I've got I don't know whether you actually share videos or not,
Yeah.
but I can send you some links. There's a book called Everything Moves, and Susan, who wrote this book, is an absolute genius in the way that she describes movement and how this biotensegrity informs human movement. But there are some interesting links back to sort of forest school principles and wider education, because some of the toys that used to be built in, I think it was some little German kindergartens, were based on tensegrity principles. And it was actually through seeing those that the originators of the science of tensegrity, if you like, actually came up with the ideas and started developing it. So essentially applied to the human body, I'll go back there.
Yeah.
We tend to get taught that the skeletal structure is your framework and it's compressional loaded, and then the muscles that surround it are sort of connect across the different joints and pull on them like pulleys and levers to allow you to move. The problem being that the general models that are used, well, actually what happens once you start to lie down or you start to move on an angle or you start to rotate, some of those principles of biomechanics are a bit more questionable. So the biotensegrity would be that actually your bones are pushing out against the elastic fabric of your connective tissue in which your muscles are enveloped, and the balance between the tension placed on those elastic muscles, the connective tissue, by the compression of the bones, that allows you to create or maintain your structure, and actually allows us to move and manipulate in 3 dimensions. It's similar things you may have seen. I don't know if you frequent the gym or you've been into any fitness centers. You'll see foam rollers on the floor, and they'll start to talk about foam rollers. They're great for this myofascial release, self-myofascial release, and the myofascia relates to the interconnectedness between all the muscles and the connective tissue that wraps around them. And the tensegrity principles are something that we use to explain then how movement is it's a whole body phenomena. It's not just 1 or 2 muscles working against an isolated joint. It just doesn't operate like that. So yeah, we use that as the basic principles then. So if you understand that, a lot of yoga, Pilates are based on similar principles. Didn't call it biotensegrity, but you can see the underpinnings of it in the ancient texts and the things that they talk about. But it just creates a different way of thinking about movement, rather than the isolated muscles. Muscles are king. We need to isolate and build up and look for the aesthetic purposes. There's lots of challenges around the way we view the body.
Well, I think that's what was really interesting about some of the links you sent. You sent a load of stuff out to everybody that did the workshop, and I was going through those videos, and like you say, it was that I really enjoy finding those things that you've just taken for granted. At some point that was taught to you, and you just go, oh yeah, and it's only when you unpick it you go, yeah. And so we're talking about that like stickman diagram of like an elbow going up and down as being a lever. And then they went, and then there's obviously nobody ever draws the wrist, because the wrist is just a weird floating bag of bones, and it doesn't. And I just ended up staring at my own wrist for ages, going. But then, so that made me then think that I was thinking about. So, I suspect it's a weirdly odd sort of diss, isn't it? I don't know if you go to the gym. I go to the gym multiple times a week, but it's always it's always slightly cutting. I do loads. Fine. I do loads of so I do quite a lot of like strongman events. And loads of that involves, what I realized is like turning these tensegrity joints into the levers. So it's like wrapping up my wrists so that I can't move them, and like putting knee sleeves on so that they're fully compressed, and it's like it can go up and down, and like weight belts all around, all this stuff. And I was kind of thinking about like, oh yeah, in some ways potentially looking at this the wrong way of going, not what have I got and how does it move, but going, how can I make myself into the simplest machine possible and then work with that. I
almost said absolutely then, but I have to find myself catching the language that we use sometimes. So you said about the simplest machine, and I'm struggling with it. There's lots of concepts. So for the PhD that I mentioned, I'm exploring different concepts. And actually, once you really start digging and ask that question, what does that actually mean?
Yeah.
And I think part of our issue, or the things that the way I'm looking at it and the way I'm exploring it, the fact that we tend to view ourselves as machines, and we link our knowledge and intelligence to sort of computer-based metaphors, I think it does a disservice to actually the amazing ability of our biological living matrix. It's far more complex than any machine. It's not simply just lots of parts assembled. It's actually something that we've grown from. If you go back into embryology, how on earth do human bodies form? I mean, and I apply generally to the human nature, but clearly this links across to how in the biological world does anything start to grow and form. They're not things that are just pieced together. So I have there's a few things. Body mind, or the body and the mind, can they ever be two different things, or is that purely something we've created, try to abstract something to be able to understand it, but have we gone maybe too far, and now we're starting to struggle? Even the word physical, so that's the one I'm working on at the moment, and going down lots of real interesting rabbit holes.
What do you mean about that word, about the word physical?
Well, exactly. What does it mean? What does it mean? So I think the title of this podcast, and another one that triggered you, made you think, was, what does it mean to be physically educated?
Yeah.
And that then, well, to really dig into that, you need to understand what we mean by physical then. And I think it's a question I'm posing within the outdoors world and within the PE world, because I think we have far too narrow a view of what we mean by physical, and that we're tending to refer to it as physical activity, which people then tend to box off as, well, that's those things that involve using large muscle groups. And it's just about actually keeping this machine, as people view it, working in good order. But there's far more to it than that. I mean, that narrows down even further in PE, oftentimes to fitness exercises or sports. And again, we know there's far more to being physical and being physically active than just those two areas. But go back to your guitar playing. Well, that doesn't necessarily involve it depends how you look at it. It can involve large muscle groups, but it's very fine motor coordination. So is that not being physical then? Because it's only small things. And what triggered? So that's one of the big questions in my PhD, is what does it mean to be physically educated? And I'm coming at it through a lens of physical intelligence, which I started out being an intelligent body. So if we have this intelligent body, if you go into the somatic world, and people talk about this innate kinesthetic intelligence, somatic intelligence, there's this innate intelligence in our body. So what does it mean to actually develop that then in a school area such as physical education? And well, is the intelligence just restricted to the body? Is it much wider than that? And then you can start to dig into all these different holes and problems. But I came at it because, physical literacy is the other big one. And I think it's starting, certainly in the PE world in the UK, in Wales, it's really a big popular thing. And I like its principle is we want to get people more physically active, because unfortunately the way the modern world is set up, we're too sedentary, and it's causing is linked to a variety of health issues, and both mental and physical health. Again, these artificial separations come in. So there's lots of things trying to get people more physically active, which is great, but I want people to think more widely than that actually, what does it mean to be physical? And physical literacy started off, I'm going to dig into my computer and find this quote. So there's a lady called Margaret Whitehead who did some amazing work on physical literacy, but it's changed direction slightly. But where she started is she was talking about what she wants from physical education is to be able to develop the range of physical capacities that would enable individual persons to make the most of their embodied dimension, enable them to interact with the world and to awaken the huge wealth of potential capacities, help them to become richer persons both in themselves and in respect of that which they know about the world. And then you just go, wow, that's so much more than what PE generally, that's almost to me a reflection of this is what learning to be in the world is about. Wider education,
Yeah.
education beyond the school feet, the school boundaries. But we still tend to focus in PE on let's just get lots of kids just being running around and hopefully playing some sports.
Yeah, that kind of speaks to something it rings with something that I've been wrestling with myself for like the last year or so, about why I find something quite challenging about a lot of alternative education methods and styles, and I've been trying to like crystallize this thought. And actually I think that it's kind of touched on it. One of the things that I find very frustrating is when there's something that is like holistically beneficial, like having physical literacy or having like social and emotional skills or having all these things, and then I always feel like it gets undercut because the last bit always then becomes, and then we see an improvement in reading, writing, maths, and like that thing of like, yeah, but having a functional body that you understand is a benefit all on its own. It doesn't just need to benefit these massive things. You know, having a body you're going to have a body the rest of your life. You should, you know, like you said, literate is a really interesting word, isn't it?
Or are you a body rather than having a body? But we can go down that one in a few minutes.
Yeah.
I'd heard you talking about that one. I think it was in the Smart Moves podcast, which is a fantastic book. So it was great that you shared that one. And I've fallen foul of the same things because again, part of me, if I'm doing this in an academic world for my PhD, I've got to justify what it is.
Yeah, of course.
And I'm very much painting those pictures of, no, it's really, really important just to be able to essentially, if you are your physical body, you are a physical body. A key part of education, and it's not just confined to in schools, but a key part of learning it's about understanding then who you are as this whole physical being and how you can then operate and thrive in the world. And that's in itself there's loads of ways it can go, but why do we always direct it back to, well, yeah, but it's about what's up here really, isn't it? And about in the brain, and then that's the academic, the reading and the writing. I wonder, I toy with this as part of what I've worked on. Is some of this related back to the Descartes' error, as they call it, with the body-mind split, but then going all the way back and going, well, actually, at that moment where the hominid species started to stand upright on 2 feet, is that sort of the beginning of this artificial separation that we all battle with between us and nature? You know, we are nature. There is no separation really, but we sort of create these blocks because we stood upright on 2 feet. We lifted ourselves literally head over heels. So now what we really consider is what's the furthest thing away from the natural, well, this thing that's up here, our head and our brain that's inside, because that's where a lot of people consider is the mind. And is that led to some of the challenging issues that we've got? I don't know any answers to it.
No, but they're big, they're lovely questions. I was wondering about. So we're thinking about like that thing of we have these ideas and education looks at things in a certain way, and I was reflecting back on like how does learning happen in different scenarios, and thinking about where there's for me a lot of physicality comes from like modeling, and I was immediately going down that thing of like, for me, I really enjoy, I run a fully belt around the woods with the kids. I am climbing trees with them, doing all that stuff, and I really enjoy doing that modeling. But I was then thinking, like we're saying, if I've got all these preconceived ideas about how my joints work and that my literacy looks a certain way, I wonder what the benefits, or maybe not benefits, I wonder what the impact is of, so our forest school, a lot of it works with like mixed age groups,
Yeah.
and the learning that can come from that modeling physically from like, I guess the extreme other way would be a group of 33-year-olds that are in their most fluid, they move in whatever way is comfortable, they just naturally do these things. And what modeling are they getting outside of that? It's like them, 3-year-old bodies, and, me, a 32-year-old human with all the literacy that comes with me. But whether you've explored anything to do with that like mixed age thing, being able to learn fluidly from like, oh, okay, we're not all three, but the 3-year-old can learn from the 5-year-old, the 5-year-old can see the 3-year-old moving in certain ways and go back. I always find it interesting watching groups of learners go up and down regardless of age, ones that are almost teenagers going, well, I'm going to try crawling again, and seeing what that does.
It's it's a fascinating topic. It's I mean, my 3 children are at 3 different ages, ranging from 6 to 15. So I've observed that in real life, and actually the role modeling that goes on from myself, my wife, and then the children with each other. And you see that rapid improvement in the younger ones, because they're constantly trying to, I want to do what the older one can do. They're not verbalizing that, but that's you can see that that's their intent and working through. There is a guy who's done some fascinating work on that one. I'm just looking around because I have a stack of books all around, and I'm trying to think where I've put this particular one. No, I've just found my Smart Moves book, but
we can come back to it. We can stick it in the show,
around
notes
somewhere. But it's a guy called Peter Gray.
Oh yeah.
And have you come across Peter Gray?
Yeah.
Peter Gray's work on play is fascinating, but he talks quite a lot about that, about how within a lot of the extant hunter-gatherer tribes, that's essentially how the individuals will learn. It's by observing and looking at their role models of adults, but then through mixed age play all the way through, and they learn and help and support each other. From a science point of view, have you come across the term mirror neurons?
Yeah, but some people won't have. So go on. Tell us about mirror neurons.
So mirror neurons would be a potential explanation for this, where essentially within, and again, we say they're all in the brain because that's where we've looked. And are there ways of storing and sharing this information throughout the rest of the body? Potentially. There are various people who are doing some fascinating work. James Oshman's one on sort of energy medicine and looking at the memory within living tissue. Anyway, I digress. But a mirror neuron essentially would be, so you have your sensory and motor neurons within the brains, those that are essentially responsible for sensing and taking in information from the external, and you have the motor neurons, the ones that are responsible for sending out the signals to create the movement pattern that you want. A mirror neuron sort of sits almost in between, and essentially it can recreate the motor pattern within your brain as if, so if you're watching and sensing, you're seeing somebody move, your mirror neurons are recreating that pattern of you moving, but without you actually doing the movement. So it's replaying it in your head to work out, oh, so how is it that they're able to do that? How would that feel in my body? How might I then be able to go out and replicate and do that thing that I'm doing? And it works on, it's not just watching other humans, it's watching any other things, living things moving. It doesn't even have to be a living thing moving. It's you see something and you can you relate yourself to that object and create that movement. So you can start to almost build the motor pattern before you're actually able to do that motor pattern. So a younger child who's got an older sibling who's constantly running around and then maybe still just pulling themselves up to standing, by watching and observing, they're actually reinforcing some of the basic motor patterning to help as soon as get them to be able to move and run around like that far quicker than someone who wouldn't have that additional patterning.
Yeah, definitely. We sometimes talk about mirror neurons. We reference them quite a lot with storytelling. because the same
Yes.
thing is happening as we're telling the story. If you start shivering, people start to feel cold. It's that same.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and the
thing going
yawning
on.
and the
Yeah. If I can just go back a minute, because you mentioned right at the start about linking it to the principles and about there being these toys that were tensegral.
integrity toys.
There
Yeah,
you go, tensegrity toys. Can you talk a bit more about those? So, are there examples that we would know, or are there?
I'm just trying to find it here.
Because I always think when we, again, like you're saying about, people going down the PE route and it becoming sport and all these things. And I feel like there's always, because for some reason, because we're on the Ofsted register, we get sent all of the junk mail in the world. Because people assume we're just a school, we get sent stuff. Have you got the right tables? Would you like these fire doors? It's a fucking words. But one of the ones we also get is these ones that go, here's the new, like, balance toys, or here's the new whatever. The best one we got was here's some plastic logs for stepping stones, and I really hold myself back from phoning them up, but it just makes me think of, like, if you're saying there are these tensegrity toys, like, where do they sit? What's some great examples of, like, that's a gimmicky, nothingy toy, and what's kind of going, this is really promoting that physical.
Yeah, I mean, there are some that allow you to help you to understand what the principles of tensegrity. Mine's wandered off. It's probably in my office at work. Little children's toys. The bits I was referring to, the kindergarten play, it's Frederick Frobo's stuff, and it curated a series of gifts and occupations. These pre-made kits of developmentally graduated materials for free exploration and play are still used today. So I never really dug in and found out what they were. But
Okay.
there are lots of little mini, like, I guess, a cross between Meccano and Lego, and just different shapes, sizes, materials of things that you can play around with to try and work them and put them together. But there were ways of putting them together with different elastic bands and the different compressive struts elements to actually build tensegrity based toys out of.
That's quite interesting, isn't it? So I suppose one of the things that in some ways is harder to find, very easy to, with natural materials, to construct, I can't remember the way you phrased it now, compression towers, and doing, like, box lashing so that things are stacking and tightening and all those things. And there's not that much in natural materials that is springy, that is like an elastic band that you can't. Rope making, I'm trying to think now, but that's quite an advanced thing for a lot of children to go, let's make some nettle cordage. In 2 months you'll be able to make a small toy with it. So that's quite interesting.
It's an interesting concept. Again, I'm very much and I always probably will call myself a beginner in most things, but I'm still, I love the exploration and trying to work out what's going on. So I don't claim to be an expert in anything, but what I have done to try and understand biotensegrity is I've joined there's an online group of biotensegrity experts, if you like, the people that really founded this and had taken the discussions on to high levels. So I will pose that question to them. Because it's the sort of thing that if no one knows an answer to, that will just intrigue them even more anyway. And go,
that's
right,
the best group of people.
So we can't come up with an answer. We will have to go out and explore it and find something, and they'll come up with something. Because there's lots of examples. The fractal patterns and things are all based off print or linked to the principles of tensegrity as well. But yeah, as an actual tensegrity type structure that you can create from
I wonder if I've shown my own bias here. So because I'm vegan, I didn't think of it, but animal, remains exist, don't they?
Well, yeah.
Potentially you've got, we're talking about learning about tendons and lots of us learn from actual tendons. I have done that, like, slightly macabre thing of finding a bird's foot with the tendons on the top, and you can pull it and make a puppet. Oh, great. Yeah, not the most vegan thing I've ever done, but still very fun.
There is an interesting thing about, again, this is part of what some of the challenges were, or what people will suggest are what led us to think of the human body in the way we did, because, it's quite difficult to cut up a real live living human and actually understand what's going on internally. So you have to work with dead bodies. But actually, once you've got a dead body, not only does gravity work slightly differently because of the compression and tension balance, but the individual tissues operate totally differently, because you haven't got that, the energetic flow through, you haven't got the same levels of liquid hydration going through. So be interesting though. If you come, you might be able to play with that. I don't know how long it would last.
Not that long, but the best toys don't last. The best toys are that's here for a day or two and then it's gone. Just to move away from the slightly macabre. So when we were doing the workshop, one of the things that stayed with me was you were talking about, I can't remember the exact phrasing, but you were talking about the spine doing circles as we walk. Spinal engine. Could you give me a brief, like a summary of what spinal engine is for people that weren't in the workshop?
So again, I'm not a major fan of the word engine, but it says what it is. That's maybe another topic of discussion, is how we live by movement-based metaphors. But spinal engine. So again, there are various theories around how we walk and move as a mammalian species, essentially, or you can go all the way back through reptilian and through fish as well, and the same principles apply, because it's an evolutionary based theory. But essentially what the spinal engine theory is where most people consider walking as controlled falling. So you lean forward and gravity is going to pull you forward unless you take a step to try and catch yourself, and then you continue to keep moving forward if you keep taking a step, or you fall flat on your face. So there's this, where does the movement come from? Is it gravity? Is it the legs? But actually, a guy called Serge Grakovetsky went back and he explored, well, is it something going on in the movement within the spine? And his thoughts are very much around, well, actually, yes, it is. Movement originates in the spine, similar to where fish will move with that lateral bend.
Movement, like everything humans do, originates from a spine. Okay.
Well, not majority of the larger gross movements.
Okay.
But will originate through the spine. There has to be there doesn't have to be, but most of the time there's then a connection through the feet to the ground as well. So there's a little bit of ground reaction forces that are working with it, but the movements are generated and driven through the spine.
Okay.
And it operates on working through all three planes of movement. So it's the total antithesis to the let's do planks for developing our core, because that's just trying to keep everything solid and rigid. It's no, what we need is a fluid moving spine, which is a little bit of a side bend and a rotation to the same side, and then a little bit of the flexion, and it creates this little bit of a coil, which then allows you to come and spin and move back up through the other way. And if you watch it, big cats are probably some of the best to actually watch. And if you watch the movement of the big cat and how actually as it's prowling, you can see that it's the spine moving through, and the arms and legs, or the legs in the case of a big cat, amplify the movement of the spine. So a little bit of movement in the spine gets amplified up through the rest of the body. So there's a slightly bigger movement through the appendages as you're moving through. And it's really efficient then to move as well, because actually you've just got those little, as long as you've got the fluidity through the body to actually allow these waves of movement to travel effectively, a tiny little movement within the spine, and that's all you have to really be controlling, that sets everything else going. In fact, with the spinal engine, it actually can work on an infinity spiral as well. So once you've started to roll it, it is worked more through that connective tissue.
You're doing, for people listening, you're doing like it's like a very swaggery walk, with shoulders doing
that's one of the ways that you could see it. Yeah, there's this swagger of sort of bending down to the side, rotating and coming back round again. If put some of those links on that I shared with you, I can send you a few more if you can't find them. Just to see people moving, or to put the big cat moving, and again with the mirror neurons, actually watching that in action, go, oh yeah, that makes sense. I can feel that. I can see that, how that would work. It takes a little bit of practice because we're so used to, again, some of the things that we're told. Might be back in a classroom, it might be another way. Sit still, stand up straight, tall, erect, nice, solid posture. And like, oh, we have to have this British stiff upper lip and we hold there. No, it's the fluidity of the movement. Two of the real fascinating areas within the human body I'm interested in. Again, from an evolutionary basis, the spine and the foot. You mentioned the wrist as a sort of this floating bag of bones. Well, the foot's essentially the same pattern of bones down there, but they're load bearing. Now, if evolution is this, through nature's design, we develop the most efficient, effective structures, systems possible, then through the millennia, we still have maintained a spine with 26 segments that should all move in three directions. And we've got 2 feet, each of which have got 26 bones, 33 joints. Now, if they've got that and they've maintained that, that's for a reason. For me, that's to allow them to move, not massive amounts of movement, but just enough movement to allow us to move more fluidly and more efficiently. The problems come that both of those things, our spine, again, it used to just be sit-ups was one of the main movements that we do, which is only working one plane of movement. It went even worse and went into planks, which is no movement. And we're sitting up straight in our chair. So we're not giving our spine what it needs to move fluently and efficiently. So use it or lose it principle. Well, is that why we potentially start to get back pain and different issues, or we get pain in other joints because the back's now not moving, so something else has to move to compensate? The same down at the feet. The feet are the 33 joints in each foot. They should be moving fluently each time your foot lands and pushes off. They're like little compression springs that they load and unload, and they move. Each little bone will move in 3 dimensions to properly load up the rest of that connective tissue up through the muscles, through the rest of the body. And if it's not allowed to move, not allowed to do its job, again, something else has to compensate. An ankle, a knee, a hip, the low back. Modern living's great. We've got modern medicine. We've got lots of modern things that we probably couldn't do without. We wouldn't have this phone call without it. But there's also some things where we've probably misguidingly gone too far with things, and we've not allowing ourselves to move as freely as we should do. What does most people put on the feet? I was very impressed though. Forest School conference, the number of people with the barefoot type shoes on. I hadn't realised that was going to be a thing. Vivo Barefoots are one of the key protagonists in that. There are others, but it's great that people are doing it. But for most people, the shoes are a torture device on the foot, a sensory deprivation chamber, a foot coffin, you could even call it, because you try and ask the shoe to do what the foot should be doing itself.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because you might think that I would say I wear my Vivos like 80% of the time that I'm in the woods. Occasionally, our woods is like a 30-degree hill, so nice. There's something about my ankles that I'm still building up the strength there to be able to spend with no ankle support a day on a hill. But yeah, you would think that for a group of people that work in uneven ground full of natural debris, that we wouldn't be the type, but it does seem to be, I guess, because we're all a bit wonky and we've all got the love, we're connecting with nature and all these things, and they do sort of stand together.
You do need to have shoes. The original purpose of the shoe was a protective layer underneath the foot, and you are going to step, unfortunately, on some things that you probably wouldn't want to step on without a shoe on.
Have you, I don't know if you've come across this yet, but I've recently heard that some insurers have now started adding barefooting as a premium to their forest school insurance. So it's no longer inside that, like, you just happen to be in the woods, and if the kids take their shoes off, some of them have started putting it on as a okay, this is now a risky activity in the same way that it's very interesting.
I hadn't heard of that, but I'm going to have to look it up now, because I was talking to someone the other day. We're looking at developing different areas up at the university here, and actually putting in barefoot walks, so deliberately setting aside areas for different sensory challenges, and walking on it barefoot. And that was one of the concerns, was around, yeah, we've got to be quite careful here, haven't we, from a risk management, health and safety perspective. But I didn't realise that you're actually adding extra premiums into
Well, it's just interesting that then is going to, because there's something about, policies inform views. So somebody new to this industry who's going to be setting stuff up and goes, oh, that's risky, is it? Oh, okay. Well, either then, well, I don't want to pay that extra bit, so we won't do that. Or, oh, okay, you're telling me that it's a premium, so it must be dangerous. Must be dangerous. So maybe we'll avoid doing that, It's interesting you were saying about, this spinal engine and moving, and that we're told, sit straight, and we're sort of, in a lot of ways, restricted physically and behaviorally. And one of the notes I was making when I was thinking about, like, what does it mean to be physically educated, was thinking about, well, what can we do for learners who arrive at us at different ages? But, a lot of forest school leaders work with adults or work with, older teenagers who will have become, in some ways, have come through a system, let's say, and will have habits or behaviors. And what ways can we be supporting in the right way, supporting their physical literacy as while we're out in the woods?
Yeah. Ideally, just being out, well, not ideally, because of being out in the woods, it provides a lot more opportunities. The affordances are there to just take part in a wider variety of movements, and it'd be one of the things. Some sports, football and rugby in particular, have taken to using parkour as a donor sport. I don't like the term donor sport, because that's got, again, it's a bit like what you're talking about, but it's got a life of its own. It doesn't just have to be a means to an end for something else. But things like that, the sort of the parkour, the MovNat, the rolling around on the ground, but in a natural environment where you're not encountering standard flat sterile surfaces and 90-degree angles and vertical walls and things, you are having to adapt and move differently all the time, because nothing in nature is a straight line. So just being out in the woodland environment, and oftentimes it's that permission. So how many times you've probably seen it, particularly someone who would come from a more habituated background, to, you mean it's okay if I go and climb in that tree, or I go and balance on that log? Do I not have to ask, or don't go, crack on? But again, comes through role modeling. It comes from that little bit of developing the confidence, but just being in the natural environment and being able to move in all different weird and odd angles, which we're designed to do. It's how we developed, it's how evolution we came through, was being able to locomote and navigate through these weird and wonderful environments. But we don't get exposed to that, because most surfaces we walk on, flat, soft, carpeted. We sit down, we don't bend our knees any more than 90 degrees, because that's, by the time our backsides hit the chair, that's as far as we need to go. So just keep allowing people to move around. Some of the other things that I like to start to play with, back into, again, some of the animal patterns. So just, okay, you've read a story, or you want a bit of inspiration for some writing, or whatever it is you're going to do. Let's just pretend we're different animals, different creatures, and playing around, and how would they move? And once you start to get them going, you don't have to teach them anything. I'm not going to stand there and go, it's not like, right, we're playing tennis and this is your forehand and this is exactly how you hold the racket, and you've got to take your backswing to here with your elbow here in relation to your shoulder here, and you've got to be looking there. No, just pretend you're a worm. On you go. What would a worm do? Just go and find some worms and watch that worm, and can you be the worm and start to move around, and all the wiggles and rolls and things that would allow you, or encourage you to then do. That's going to feed in this stimulus for just developing, maintaining, getting that movement back in. There's all sorts of animal moves. I mean, you've probably seen similar things. There's a group called Animal Flow, and they have all the different named animal patterns. There's different arguments because different people call it the same thing by different names and whatever else. But being a monkey, being a frog, crawling around like a lizard, moving like a bear, rolling like a worm, an inchworm.
I was watching the other day. The only way I could describe them is they're like crutches that go on your arms. And the first place I saw them was in the stage show of The Lion King. You know, when people walk around like this thing. And there's a movement coach called Terry Notary, who does a lot of stuff out in New Zealand. And he now has a fitness class on all fours. So, you know, like thing of like when you bend down and your arms don't quite reach the floor. So there's these like 2-foot crutches on your arms, and they run across like, you know, the desert and run across the thing, or in this like, I guess it's that spinal engine-y kind of thing.
It will be. You've just got that extra extension on the end of the arms. Yeah.
It made me think when you were saying about animal shapes and stuff. I always feel like I, as a leader, learn so much about people just watching them move for a minute. And actually, when I was teaching, I used to get the kids, you know, every half term or whatever, for no reason other than my own information, to run from one side of the playground to the other.
Yeah.
And I couldn't really pinpoint exactly what I was learning, but seeing people run makes me go, okay, there's something here. You need some support, or that bit of you know, and the same with like, can you be a worm? You get a group of people being worms, and you learn so much more than you would from just going, I don't know, can you do these football drills or whatever else? You just go, oh, okay, when you move like a worm, your legs don't move. And that's really interesting. Like that's, I always think those sort of natural movements that you say about having permission, they're both sort of not scary, but like intimidating for some learners, and at the same time hugely regulating. Anybody I know that regulates through movement, they regulate through functional movement. They don't regulate through like those levers and hinge movements. They regulate through rolling around in hammocks, or through swinging, or through, you know, all that stuff. I just wondered if you'd come across
the spiral type patterns, and the vibration would be some of the other elements to that as well. Spirals, that's again the way that the body's structured. It goes back into embryology. You know, we don't just unfold on 90-degree angles. Things revolve and move around. Again, if you watch those nice slow motion time lapse of a seed growing into whatever plant, and you see how they emerge out in these spiral forms. That's how we emerge and grew out. So everything's spiral in nature. None of these hinges that we talk about and levers in the body are straight lines. So it would make sense that people are looking to try and find that more natural type of movement to help regulate somewhat.
Yeah, amazing. Rich, I could talk your ear off like all night. It's genuinely, you know, really engaging, but I'm conscious of time and that you've got other stuff. So for people listening, where should they be looking next? Where can they find out more about what you're up to? Things like that.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I have put a couple of bits out. So I'm just over halfway through the PhD. I am going to start to build a website at some point. There's a few articles I put out in the IOL's Horizons magazine. I've done something for the AFP magazine, which is the PE Matters, so the Association of PE. I'm happy to share some of those with you and with the other people who might be listening and be interested. My Twitter and Instagram, which I don't overly use, but they're there, is MTR Nature. So it's Move, Train, Regen, Nature, or just Move, Train, Regen, or you can look up my name, you'll find things there. And I post little bits on. It's not so much about me in some of these things. That's why I've not built many things. If I was to direct people to anywhere, have a look at things, have a look at Biotensegrity. I can share you some of that work. Have a look at Animal Flow, have a look at MovNat, have a look at Way of the Rope. These are all much more functional, natural movements that we should be doing and are brilliant for forest school environments. And it doesn't take, there's minimal equipment required, if any. A piece of rope, for wear the rope, that would be the only one, and they work perfectly with whatever size groups and whatever age groups that people might be working with. So yeah, maybe I will get a little website and things developing at some point.
Oh, I'm sure you're going to have questions coming in after this.
Yeah, and I think that's partly what I was thinking. So maybe I can open it out the other way and go, would it be useful? Because my idea was to develop my website would essentially be a little bit about me and my work and what I'm doing and why, but actually more as a signposting. So if you're interested, maybe I've seen something, come and have a look, and I'll put it into different categories and share things there. So would there be a sort of a central repository, I guess, of movement-based ideas for forest school, for PE, for outdoor learning?
Yeah, definitely.
For working with different age groups. That's a bit of a plan at some point.
Oh, amazing. Oh, yeah, please do that. That would be amazing. Please do. Just for me personally. I don't care if anybody else goes on. I need that.
Well, you may be still working through all the rest of the stuff I sent you last time. It was
no, that was great. That was amazing. Right, I'm going to let you go because it's been great, but I'm conscious of time. So thank you so much for chatting. And
no problem. And I'll keep working my way back through your own podcast. I've enjoyed listening to some of those. There's a lot of crossovers and things that until I started digging down some of these paths, you don't realise actually where physical gets to. The physical basis of emotion and that side. But maybe that's another podcast another day.
Definitely.
We'll hopefully catch up.
All right.
Some more forest school stuff or whatever it is. But great, thanks for the opportunity to chat. And
brilliant.
Meet again soon.
All right. Cheers, mate.
Cheers to that.
Cool.
Yeah.
It's big.
It is big. And really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed this podcast. And one of the thoughts that kind of popped out to me was the bit where he was saying about, I think you asked a question about supporting learners of any age who have become accustomed to moving or not moving in certain ways and maybe becoming very static. And I just found that whole thing about like the cultural expectations of movement and posture and stuff really interesting. And when he said, you get, or was it you? One of you said you get those learners who might go, oh, what? So you mean I'm allowed to go and climb the tree, And that might not just be from kind of cultural expectations or habit. It might be just levels of confidence and being in a weird place with weird people. And you're like, I'm going to wait for an adult to tell me what to do. And that really chimed with me. And I really thought, because in forest school, we're so, you're focusing on the positives, aren't you? And going, oh, it's just so great. Look at these kids. They're like running around. They're just free. And you're just like focusing on the wonderful movement that's happening. And if we shift our focus, because there will be learners for all of us who are working with any group who are less physically confident or less physically able and are more cautious for whatever reason. And I was thinking about how to support those learners. And I was thinking about what Richard was saying about like animal movements. And I was thinking about all the games that we play, like doing like animal yoga, or we're going to drum and dance around like loons. And then when the drum stops, we're all going to make this animal together. Yeah. Like 5 of us are going to be in a group and we're going to make a spider. And then does the spider move and all that? Those silly games, right? Which are silly games in inverted commas. But I thought about all the benefits of those kind of games, but I hadn't necessarily thought about the physical benefits of those. Okay. And I was thinking more about like, one of my takeaways from listening to this podcast was like, right, I really want to focus now for the next few sessions on, yes, Luna, so you were talking about, this is really long-winded, sorry, I will get to a point eventually, I promise. You were talking about like modelling as an adult or somebody who has got more physical confidence, like, oh, you can move like this, and the mirror neuron stuff, oh my gosh, that was so cool. And I was thinking about putting in place more of those, like games either at the beginning of a session or after lunch or whatever, that really scaffold moving in different ways. And I was like, right, I really want to make a list of like those things that might not appear to be, now we are doing movement. It's a game, or it's a follow the leader type thing, or things like that. And I was wondering whether you had any thoughts about that, or any kind of like light bulb moments go, oh, we're actually, when we do that, it's actually helping these learners, or I want to do more of that, or...
Well, I think one of the things I remember that we used to do years ago, and we do less and less of it now, but perhaps, this is how these things work. You come back to an idea.
Yeah.
And so we've got that little, it's like an off-ground obstacle course.
Yeah.
Around our woods. And we've just built another one this week.
Yeah.
But the sort of permanent one, we used to do a lot of, if somebody had done it, go, okay, one-handed. Okay, one leg. Okay, eyes shut. I actually
without touching the ground at all.
I actually quite like not the games and things that we do where, and even we do this in war games and stuff, where you're doing the same thing as normal, but you're giving yourself,
constraint.
A constraint. The best writing comes out of constraining words or whatever. The best, whether I was going to say the best physical learning, but that's not what I mean. What I mean is different physical learning.
Yeah, because you explore your body, don't you? And we used to do that loads when I taught drama in terms of group physical work. That if you said to a group and now with your bodies create a piece of physical theatre that expresses the idea of grief, they'd be like, what the heckins? But if you go, right, as a group, you have to move from point A to point B, but at any one time, only 4 points of contact can be on the ground or whatever. And then you've got a constraint, and then you explore different ways, and then you put some Hans Zimmer music in the background, and you've got this incredibly moving piece of physical theatre about grief. And it's really, but you'd never come up with that way of moving if you...
Yeah, it's low demand, isn't it? It's low demand where you go...
Or a challenge, it's like a stretch challenge.
But if you go, there's too many choices here. So you go low demand physicality.
Low arousal.
Low arousal, that's what I mean, sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you. Low arousal physicality is here's the constraints. How do you do this thing? I think the difficulty is when you put those constraints in, for some people going on one leg is super easy. For some people going on one leg is ooh.
Yeah.
So you almost need to let that be self-directed in terms of going okay, you've got to take away one of your limbs. And then you can make a choice about which one that is. Or
yes.
Can you do that?
You've got to make it accessible.
Yeah.
For everybody.
Because that's one of the difficult things about physical education in general, I think. When you think about PE lessons, is actually scaffolding that huge range of what's the differentiation?
Yeah.
Is really challenging. But actually, if you can flip it on its head, get that thing of permission in and it not being competitive, then actually most learners find their own level of this is what makes it fun and the right level of challenge for me. So I'm going to keep doing it that way.
Yes. And way more inclusive, right? So if you've got anyone who for any reason can't move in that way, or
whether that's permanent or temporary, because that's the thing, isn't it? We always think about inclusivity as somebody that's always going to be in a wheelchair, always going to be a whatever. But actually, we need to also be thinking somebody who's, as the kids will tell you, they've touched their ankle. They're I've dislocated my ankle, Lewis, so I can't walk on my ankle. And then they're hopping on the wrong ankle for 5 minutes. But that thing of being flexible is super important, I think.
Yeah.
It does make me think of there's an old Bill Bailey bit where he says he's talking to somebody who is Eastern European and their job is they're a professional dressage coach, but they can't find the English for it, and so he just goes, I make horses do unusual movements. What do you do at forest school? I make learners do unusual movements.
Yeah.
And
I was thinking about how, this podcast I think makes you realise and remember how important physicality is, especially for, I was going to say especially for children, but I don't know if that's true. But I was thinking about some learners that we work with who, forest school in their week is going to be the most physical they're ever going to be. And is really a rare opportunity for them to explore their bodies, which is life-changing, Yeah. I think about learners who have recently learnt to go upside down on what they call the gymnastics bar, where it's just it's a straight, it's a horizontal bar, box lashed onto 2 trees, and there's obviously the physical experience of being upside down for the first time off their own bat, and the self-esteem repercussions of that they've done it and it was hard and all that kind of stuff. And I just don't think, I think we are, you can underestimate the physical side of forest school, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I think the one thing I want to do going forwards is more physical pole bridging.
Yeah.
More of.
Do you want to explain in case
explaining
learners
what
haven't?
I'm doing?
Yeah.
You know, talking out loud. Oh, I can see you're moving your thing. I reckon that. I wonder if you can feel that in your legs or like.
This is going to be tricky because
But
it's really
more-
slidey, so I'm going to
Yes.
turn my feet to the side and, I
But-
can't do it here, but if I pull my tummy muscles in, then I'm going to try that, all that kind of
But
pole
what
bridging.
I want to do is expand my vocabulary. Maybe vocabulary is the wrong word. Like the times that I do that, away from just, oh, the hill's big today. Oh, I'm so tired. Oh, my legs are achy. Oh, we need a drink. Into like, it's almost like that's all. I'm only talking about the negative side of physicality. I want to talk about the the
Yeah.
positive sides of it as well, and go, oh, I feel really good now because I've used my body. Oh, I feel like this bit's loosened up now. Oh, now we've done, like, I want to do that. That's
Yeah.
my big takeaway.
Yeah.